It is always my honor to pray for events like these. So, as we gather to celebrate the radical and revolutionary and innovative decisions of a small group of committed leaders at Decatur Presbyterian Church, I would be remiss if we didn't also recognize that we are a nation in mourning. Yet again, a violent tragedy at an American school where children the age of my own daughter were gunned down. So I invite you to join me in a time of prayer and silence. Creator, sustainer, and healer, we come to you with heavy hearts, hoping that you can help us to see a way forward. We are heartbroken at still more loss of life and struggle to see how we can make the necessary changes to keep everyone safe. Be to us and to all those who mourn a calming presence and a guiding light to seeking the best way to work towards bending the arc of the universe ever more towards justice. We are grateful for this place that seeks to educate minds and hearts, young and not so young, to do just that. You call us to live into justice, and here we promise to engage the challenges that surround us and to do it with honor and deep thought. We seek to help students understand and navigate our radically changing global society. Help us to give every aspect of that change deep thought and great honor, so that as we engage with the challenges in the world, we do so with compassion. You call us to work with imagination and love. Help us be bold in our imagination and loving in our implementation. We thank you today for the foresight and determination of that small group of committed leaders. Without their commitment to the education of women, we would not be here today. Help us to continue that determination and commitment, and help us to celebrate all those who have given of themselves, of their lives and their labors to nurture this place and help us grow and prosper. We give you thanks today and every day for the gifts you have bestowed upon us. Help us to see our own potential, both personally and as an institution, seeking to live fully into who you call us to be. We ask your blessing on this time and place and all gathered here, that we may all live out your calling to each of us, each and every day. This we pray to your many and beautiful names. Amen.
And patience. In fide vestra virtutem, in virtute autem scientiam. In fide vestra virtutem, in virtute autem scientiam. And to patience godliness, and to godliness humanly kindness, and to humanly kindness charity. In fide vestra virtutem, in virtute autem scientiam. In fide vestra virtutem, in virtute autem scientiam. Let
Wow. That was just magnificent sotto voce, and I just want to say how incredibly meaningful it was for me for you to perform in Hungarian. That is just spectacular. Our speaker just said to me, boy, they're ambitious. Because that is not an easy piece of music, and especially to perform it. And you know, they're not all native Hungarian speakers. It's maybe a surprise, but that was just beautiful. And I want to express my gratitude to all of you, and also to the incredible Elise SQ Sparks, who does such a beautiful job with our students. It's wonderful, as well as the incredible and amazing David D'Ambrosio, who is such an important part of our. And I want to welcome each and every one of you to our 2018 Founders Day Convocation. What a special, special event in the life of this college. You know, we do lots of things this weekend. You know, we celebrate Founders Day. So as Chaplain Kate said so beautifully in her opening prayer, we think back to the audacity and the boldness and the vision and the determination of those elders of Decatur Presbyterian Church, and the extraordinary generosity of our founding benefactor, George Washington Scott, and his love for his mother, which is a very positive force in the world, you know, to love your mother, and the way in which, when Decatur Female Seminary was encountering some financial difficulties in those early days, he stepped forward and he said, no, I really want this school and its audacious vision of educating young women to offer them an education that is up to the highest standards of the land, which was, you know, that founding document from the Reverend Frank Henry Gaines, that this school was going to be second to none in its commitment to excellence. And George Washington Scott stepped forward and he said, yes, I will give you what was then really a fortune. My one request is that you rename the school for my late mother, because everything that is good in my heart I owe to her, and so that's how we became known as Agnes Scott Institute and then Agnes Scott College, and forever had that alphabetical advantage as well, starting with A. So there are many positive things about that particular moment, and so it is that every year this weekend around this date we celebrate Founders Day. We celebrate that incredible generosity and vision of our founding benefactor, George Washington Scott. I'm very proud to be wearing the Irvine tartan today for Agnes Irvine Scott, and my husband, wherever he is, I've lost him, there he is, Jeff is wearing the Irvine tartan as his tie, and I do want to recognize Betty Scott Noble, class of '71, in her beautiful Irvine tartan skirt as a member of the Scott family, a family that has remained so committed and connected to Agnes Scott, and so we're just thrilled to have you with us, as well as many other special people. So we have with us today members of the Parents Council. If you're a Parents Council member, would you just raise your hand so we can recognize you? We're delighted to have our Parents Council members here. A number of you are super excited because your daughters are sophomores and are about to get the black ring of power at sophomore ring ceremony. So the class of 2020, the visionaries, will be receiving their beautiful onyx rings at sophomore ring ceremony tomorrow. We also have members of our alumni board. If you're an alumni board member, would you raise your hand? We're delighted, as well as members of our Founders Club. We just had a wonderful lunch to honor Founders Club members. These are folks who have they're among our leadership donor groups, folks who've made a gift of $5,000 or more to the college in the last year. So if you're a Founders Club member, if you would raise your hand so we can recognize you. We are really grateful to you for your generosity. And of course, we have fantastic faculty, our wonderful, wonderful faculty and staff and students who are with us as well. And I mentioned, so this weekend we celebrate the founding of Agnes Scott, and then we have the sophomore ring ceremony, which is such an important ceremony on the way, on the journey through Agnes Scott. And then on Sunday, so I'm going to ask Chaplain Kate to do extra special prayers for good weather on Sunday, because we will be welcoming an all-time record. It's nearly 230 admitted students from 31 states for our Scholars Weekend. This is where the highest, the most academically qualified admitted students come to campus to interview for our major scholarships. And so that's going to be on Sunday. So what a beautiful way in which the past and the present and the future are encapsulated and celebrated in one very rich and full weekend. This is my 12th Founders Day and my last Founders Day celebration. And so that's also a really meaningful and kind of bittersweet moment for me. I went back through the files to just remind myself of everyone who we've invited to Founders Day during my time at Agnes Scott. And it's really an incredible list, not only of speakers, but also of topics. So we have had Nan Cohan, president of Duke and former president of Duke and of Wellesley, speaking on leadership and women's leadership. And Cathy just reminded me that both of us got our start at Duke thanks to Bob Cohan, Nan's husband, which is really wonderful. He has been a mentor to both of us, which is a wonderful connection. And we had Trisha Bertram-Gallant talking about honor codes and academic integrity across the country. We had the wonderful John Kirkendall, former President Emeritus of Davidson College, as well as Gary Luer, head of the Association of Presbyterian Colleges and Universities, each of whom, in different years, talked about our Reformed heritage and what does it mean to be this beautifully diverse and inclusive college that cares deeply about its roots in the Presbyterian tradition of higher education and continues to have a relationship with the Presbyterian Church. We've also had conversations with board chairs, with Clyde Tuggle as well as with Harriet King, and engaged with questions and dialogue about sort of the past and the present and the future of Agnes Scott. And then we had a couple of really, really cool Founders Days where we were focused on particular themes. One was our trailblazing women. So the women through the history of Agnes Scott who were the greatest trailblazers, and we honored them, and students got up and talked about them. And then one of my favorites was as we honored our trailblazing people of color. So our first African-American students, our first Jewish students, our first faculty of color, and really sort of told the story of, through the Founders Day Convocation, of how Agnes Scott, a historically white college, evolved and grew and engaged with the social challenges of our time and became the extraordinary, beautiful mosaic that we are today, with such an extraordinarily diverse student body and a growingly diverse faculty and staff and board of trustees and leadership. So it was wonderful to kind of go back and think about all of the ways in which this convocation has been an opportunity to talk about important issues that are at the heart of our mission. our mission as a place that is committed to educating and empowering women, to being a liberal arts college that continues to engage with, as our mission statement says, the social and intellectual and social challenges of our time. So as I was thinking, okay, this is my last Founders Day, so I better make this good, right? And I realized I knew exactly who I wanted to come to be I'm gonna cry now. Okay, the Founders Day speaker in my last year, because as I thought about the journey Agnes Scott has been on through the creation of Summit and the incredible depth of the work and the dialogue that particularly this faculty and staff and trustees have engaged in as we've thought about what does it mean to be a college that empowers women in the 21st century? What does it mean to really prepare our students to be leaders in a diverse and dynamic global society? And we struggled with that and we argued over it and then we've worked on it and then we keep working on it. And it's a work in progress, and we continue to tweak Summit and to refine and to engage with Summit. And so I was thinking, okay, as I prepare to leave Agnes Scott, and Agnes Scott continues to be on this Summit journey, and I'm so excited about my successor, Lee Zach, who will be here next year for her first Founders Day. And I thought, who could really speak to that journey of innovation? Who could really deepen the conversation, maybe push us a little bit and you know, be a really creative thinker alongside our faculty and our community? And there was an obvious choice, which is Professor Cathy Davidson. Cathy Davidson was at Duke when I was there as a chaired professor of English, but so much more than that. I mean, she's written 20 books. This woman is, you don't sleep, as far as I can tell. She's a prolific scholar, but also a leader, and somebody who, you know, I remember when I first got to know her, she was somebody who, as an English professor, was so engaged with the work that I was doing with ethics and really contributing to that and engaging with it, but also really driving forward creative thinking across Duke around interdisciplinarity, around innovation, around what it means to be a humanities scholar in the 21st century who cares about major challenges and seeks to write scholarship and to lead in a way that engages those challenges. She became, I think, the country's first Vice Provost for Interdisciplinary Affairs at Duke, and then went on to found the first, it's called Haystack. It's the first sort of digital humanities, and now it goes beyond the humanities, but digital platform, I guess, for scholars. And how many do you have now on the? 16,000 who are engaged with Haystack. And then went to CUNY, to the City University of New York. And I have just been such an admirer of Cathy as a thought leader, as an incredible teacher, somebody who thinks deeply about pedagogy and teaching and connecting with students and changing their lives, but also thinks deeply about higher education and where are we going in higher education in the 21st century. So I thought, okay, Cathy's the right person, but can we get her? And we did, and so I want to thank Cathy Davidson for your willingness to come and to be a part of this Founders Day celebration. I want to thank Elaine Meyer-Lee, our Summit Director, and Rachel Rossetti from our Math Department and head of our Center for Digital and Visual Literacy for your efforts and all your hard work in designing Cathy's visit. I know she's going to be doing a workshop with faculty later this afternoon. But first, we all have the pleasure of hearing from her. She will be speaking, she will then be engaging, because you can't have Cathy Davidson speaking without, it's got to be interactive. So she's going to be engaging with all of us, and then I'll get a chance to be in dialogue with her. So please join me in welcoming Professor Cathy Davidson.
If you're on Twitter and you follow me on Twitter, you know that this morning I was tweeting away. I gave a talk and several workshops and taught some classes at Georgia Tech this week. And one of the people who was at my talk last night, which was not live streamed because all the technology failed. We won't go to that. Someone on Twitter, a famous scholar named Ian Bogus said, okay, you've talked about all these great models of universities in the 21st century. What conditions at institutions allowed change to happen? And I was waiting for my ride to come, for Elaine to pick me up this morning, so I tweeted 15 things I thought were ingredients. And then I thought about it and I said, but there's this 16th, and that's go across town and talk to the people at Agnes Scott College. That's the best way of finding out what you can do to change, to really make significant, substantial change at a university. I am so impressed by everything I've read about and everything I've seen in my short time here, and I'm so honored to be here with my friend Elizabeth Keisha on your last Founders Day, but with such a lasting and long legacy. It's really impressive. I've been to about 40 universities in the last 6 months, and colleges, universities, community colleges, and I don't know any. Arizona State, I would say, is the only other place that's as extensively grappled with the challenges of higher education. You should all have a pencil and a note card. That's not swag. Everybody's going to do homework. I'm going to be talking a little bit about the history of higher education. This is just going to be 15 minutes, and the last 3 minutes, you're all going to be contributing. And that's part of remaking higher education for the world we live in now. Because one of the things we'll find out is the cliche that higher education will never change because it hasn't changed since Socrates walked the floor of the academy. It's just wrong. Much of higher education went through a massive redo in the late 19th century because the world went through a massive redo with industrialization, with steam power, with the telegraph and the telephone, with the Model T, with the assembly line, with massive changes to work, life, everything about how humans were interacting. So the higher education was changed for that world. I'm going to talk a little bit about that history. It's going to sound very familiar. I won't have to explain much of the history, much of the changes that were fully in place by about 1925. I won't have to explain them because they're the world we live in now. Except our world has changed. So I'll also be talking and making an invitation to all of you to think about other ways we can change, even beyond what Agnes Scott has done so far. Agnes Scott's mission. Agnes Scott became a university, tell me the date again. 1906. Right smack in the middle of the creation of the modern university. It was part of a national trend and an international trend to transform what used to be the Puritan college designed to train ministers into a world designed, a higher education designed to train a new professional managerial class to be the managers of the factories that were springing up everywhere in America. There was a man at the beginning of this change. His name was Charles Eliot. He went on to write a book, not coincidentally, he stole my title, called The New Education. When Charles Eliot was in his 20s, he was a young professor at Harvard, where he himself had gotten his degree. And he didn't need to support himself. He had a trust fund. And in fact, that's a good thing, because nobody at Harvard could live on the salary being paid to professors, because it was assumed you were a professor at Harvard, you had a trust fund. That's what a professor was. And that your father went to Harvard, and probably his father went to Harvard. And then his father lost everything. The whole very vast Eliot fortune in the Panic of 1857, the world's first global financial panic. Many people in Europe blamed the Panic of 1857 on the terrible, inadequate, archaic, antiquated American system of higher education. Why? Because they said, and this is going to sound a little familiar, America was great at creating technology. America was great at creating new inventions. But there was nobody that knew how to control them, how to regulate, how to see if these technologies really had any usefulness, any good for the humanity that technology was supposed to serve. Again, The elite colleges of the time were designed to train ministers. About only 10% of Harvard graduates at that time went on to be ministers. So there was a mismatch between what you were being trained for at the most elite colleges and what the world needed. So when Eliot's family lost everything in the panic of 1857, he had another grandfather who passed away and left him enough money for him to go to Europe with his wife and 2 very young children to study the European system of higher education, the Humboldtian University, that had gone through a transformation for the modern world. And for 2 years he studied the Humboldtian system in Germany and in France, came back to the United States and worked at a brand new upstart university that was based on the Humboldtian model and that paid faculty a living wage, called MIT. And while at MIT, he wrote a scathing indictment of American higher education called The New Education that spanned 2 issues of the Atlantic Monthly magazine. It was read by everybody. And this is just one quote. It requires courage to put the beaten paths in which the great majority of well-educated men have walked and still walk. Conservatism is never more respectable than an education, for nowhere are the risks of change greater. And I should say at Agnes Scott, he meant men, but because Harvard, of course, was only a male university at that time. He was 34 when he wrote this. Harvard had gone through 3 presidents in quick succession. And the board of trustees called and said, how would you like to be our president? We liked your essay and we agree. That does not happen. He said yes. And he served as a president for 40 years. The next slide you're going to see are among the transformations that happened in America that he was part of, and at Harvard, that basically didn't exist before 1860 and existed fully institutionalized in place, not only at Harvard, but throughout every kind of American institution. Elite Ivy League schools, the brand new land-grant universities. Over 70% of the new land-grant universities were presided over by a friend of, basically a friend of Charles Eliot's. Usually somebody who went to Harvard or he knew. Community colleges. The new community colleges started with Joliet Community College, where I actually had one of my first teaching jobs. They too, Joliet Community College was started by the president of the University of Chicago, and the correspondence between him and Eliot are all about how we needed a system of vocational training to train high school teachers. Again, Eliot's influence. And women's colleges all over America that were designing a new kind of education for the mothers of the next professional managerial class. That's the kind of rhetoric that you see in all of the essays of the time and the letters of the time. This is only some of the things. Mandatory public secondary schooling, K through 12 curriculum requirements, land-grant universities, research universities, majors, minors, electives, division, certification, graduate school, collegiate law school, nursing school, graduate school of education, collegiate business schools, degree requirements, credit hours, grades, statistics, standard deviations, spreadsheets, blueprints, all of which get adopted by higher education, return on equity, punch clubs, IQ tests, giftedness, learning disabilities, multiple choice tests, college entrance exams, multiple choice college entrance exams, otherwise known as the SATs, tenure, sabbaticals, faculty pensions, school rankings, donor name chairs, corporate sponsorship of research, adolescence, and failure. Does anyone need an explanation of any of those things? Pretty striking, right? My favorite, grade, and the F. I actually did this research for my last book, the previous book, which was on mostly about K through 12. Before 1888, when you were evaluating students, you wrote out long evaluations and you talked to them. But Women's College, Mount Holyoke, decided it wanted to be a modern, scientific, industrial age training school for young women and adopted this new system that had been mostly used in factories, which is to take all of the learning of a semester, all of the complex ways that you learn and don't learn, your successes and failures and all the different ways, and reduce it to an A, B, D, C, D, or, whoops, can you really give somebody an E for failure? If you go back to the archives of Mount Holyoke, there's tremendous debate about this trauma, A, B, C, D, but if we give somebody an E, someone might think it means excellent. We can't have that. So let's give them an F for failure. Now think about it, none of the other letters are referential. Failure's the only one. When I started going back and looking at the design of the F, what I found within a year after Mount Holyoke adopting A, B, C, D, or F grades, there's a whole science in the new social sciences of psychology, sociology, and psychology, sociology, and psychiatry of what it means to be, not to fail, but to be a failure. Learning disability and giftedness come out of that. Debates on accelerated learning come out of that. And interestingly, so do people who are protesting vehemently about reducing the complexity of learning to A, B, C, D, or failure, which is a whole world of progressive educators. Montessori, John Dewey, and many other progressive educators who are fighting this desperately and who, let's just say, lost. They lost the fight. One reason they lost the fight, this is research I've been doing since I wrote The New Education, is because at the same time that Eliot is doing, and his friends are doing all of those things, they're also creating a number of professional associations that regulate and rank the people making the new system. So you have a system of grading within grading within grading. My friend Fred Moten, a great poet and theorist, African-American poet and theorist, said if you were a Martian and you were to come down to Earth and look at this thing called school in America, and you were really looking at its structural and most prominent features, you'd say, oh yes, school, let me define that. School means people with more power tell people with less power whether they're failing or how close they're coming to success. That kind of breaks my heart. But much of school is about that because even the people who are grading are being graded. Right? Look at these dates. Right? This is the beginning of the professionalization of American education, the whole structure of American education, including of things like the Committee of 10 was a committee that was set up by Charles Eliot, chaired by Charles Eliot, to set the standards for high school in America. So it's all intertwined. And that's why it's hard, and why Agnes Scott has been so brave to undertake the changes it's undertaken. Why it's so hard to change is that everything is related to everything else. And the evaluation isn't just in your classrooms, but it goes all the way down and all the way up. So any change means you're talking to accreditors. In 2015, Hampshire College, a small college in New England, decided it not only didn't like SATs, it was going to refuse to collect SAT scores. It has no data, no records whatsoever on the SATs of its students. What that meant is it could no longer be in ratings. It also meant hundreds of hours of talking with the Northeastern Society of Accreditation of Colleges, and I got the acronym wrong, to ensure that it could still be accredited. But that's pretty brave for a small college. Pretty brave for a small college to say, we don't care if we're never in the U.S. News and World Report. They've increased their yield by 21%, increased their diversity by 20%. So it's been an incredibly successful experiment, but brave. It takes courage to change. Remember what Charles Eliot said? He wasn't wrong about that. It takes courage to change. But we have to. Our world has changed every bit as much as Charles Eliot's changed. He and his colleagues created a university for their world of the steam power, of the telegraph. This is my date for the beginning of the internet. On April 22nd, 1993, Dan Reed, Larry Smarr, and some other profs, they're all people who helped me start my organization, Haystack. They all were professors at the National Center for Supercomputing Applications at the University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana. They came out with one notebook page with a list of all of the world's websites on it. And they said, we are giving to you, the world, the most amazing gift that anyone could give you. We are giving you access to this whole page of websites. On that day, anyone with the Mosaic 1.0 browser, and they taught you how to do this. I literally did. I was president of the American Studies Association, and because I'm kind of a geek and I'm also dyslexic, and I thought this would make life easier, we downloaded it and became the first association in the world, who knew, to be online. Anyone with an internet connection could talk, could communicate, could type. Actually, we're like, type. To anyone else with an internet connection, without an editor, without a publisher, without a censor, without a pullback oops button. There are some powerful people in the world right now who I wish had an oops button. My argument is we haven't done a very good job. Agnes Scott's going a long way. We still have a long way to go before every institution of higher education and K through 12 helps all of us take back a world that was changed on April 22nd, 1993, when you could still write all of the world's websites on one number. By the end of 1993, there were 10,000 websites. By one estimate, internet use increased by 2,500% by January 1st, 1994. No invention in history of technology is my field. No invention in the history of technology has been as fast, as global, as extensive as the invention of the internet, nor has any changed the conditions of how we live, how we work, how we interact with one another. I love watching old movies with my students, where like, we're going to do everything as fast as we can. Let me dial your number, right? It's like the students are like, it takes 5 minutes to make a phone call. My gosh, how do you know? It's a total. We interact in a different world at a different pace. According to the recent study by Lawrence Katz, that came out in December, 94% of all new job creation in the last decade is in contingent labor. That means, wow, you have the freedom to work at home, and you get paid by the job, and you can set your own hours. Yeah. We need to regulate that. We need to make sure there are worker rights. I'm now on a task force for the city of New York that's trying to say, Silicon Valley does tech, New York City does ethical tech. We're talking about something called algorithmic accountability, where anything that maximizes data, automates data, says, does it distribute and maximize racism, gender, sexism? What about facial recognition? What about prison sentencing that's now being done automatic based on profiling? How can we get control of that again? How can we get control of our world? In 1906, a famous author named Upton Sinclair wrote a book called The Jungle that wakened all of us up. We desperately need the jungle for the world we live in now. And we desperately need a Charles Eliot to make higher education as extensively. Everything on that page we need to look at again, back on the big page. We need to look at it again and think, how does it serve the mission of preparing young people for this world? So, now it's your turn. Pencils and paper, because one thing we all need to do is learn to take responsibility in a different way than the hierarchical way of shopkeeper, for the people working on the floor, professional managerial class, who have to respond to their boss in a hierarchical way, because we now live in a world where we can all contribute. What does that mean? So one of the things I believe is we have to go back to those progressive educators like Montessori and Dewey and think again about what it means for all of us to be responsible for education. So we're going to try that now. I'm going to set my little timer. That's very 19th century. It's not my iPhone. For 90 seconds, quick. And you're going to do, it's going to be 3 parts. So make sure you write neatly. Somebody else may be reading that, or you'll be reading it out loud in part 2. But for part 1, 90 seconds, 3 things, low stakes, there's 3 things that you would start with first to revolutionize the university for the world we're living in now. This method, while some of you are finishing up, this method is called active learning, engaged learning, radical pedagogy, participatory learning. It's the opposite of one-way communication. And it's about, because everything in our education is about selectivity. This is actually when you select, that means you're also leaving some people out. And you're missing some of the best ideas. That what you learn from participatory and inventory methods of pedagogy is there's far more interesting stuff going on in a room than you ever find out about. 20% of students graduate from college saying they've never once talked in a classroom unless they've been specifically asked a question. To me, that's a total tragedy. Also, we know that the people who succeed and tend to go on as professors are the ones who most replicate the hidden, unspoken cultural assumptions of the professors. It's one reason why in 30 years of writing brilliant race scholarship, brilliant gender scholarship, higher education looks exactly the same in terms of race and gender profiles as Fortune 400 companies. And in fact, less diverse than it has on the professorate and administrative level, less diverse than it was a generation. So finding out how everybody participates and everyone contributes has a social justice component. It's also this is a technique that goes all the way back to the evolution. This is a real community organizing technique. Part 2. Turn to somebody next to you, and then I do this in a very rigid way because I'm haunted by that 20% of people never speak. So every class I teach and every meeting I conduct, there's one participatory exercise where for at least 45 seconds, somebody has to shut up and listen to you. I think we don't do that nearly enough in our society. So for what you're going to do, one person reads what's on their card, don't extrapolate, just read. Another person listens, no interruption. Then switch. You've each heard each other. Then I want you to look at think about the 3 things you each had, and think about one thing that you're going to share with the whole audience. You might edit, you might have to compromise, you might have to synthesize. All of these are components of what we call learning. This is all a very effective cognitive process. It works in any, you can use this in your workplace, you can use this in school meetings, you can use this in community meetings. I use it in department meetings now. It's amazing how it shuts up those people that hog all the time and talk all the time. Not necessarily the smartest people in the room. Just saying. Okay, 90 seconds again. Turn to somebody else. One person reads, one person listens, switch, and then find something to tell them. It's my favorite part of every talk I give, when I just like to get your attention back. People will say to me, do students really want to learn if you don't grade them? I say, yeah, my students do. People say, you have to ban laptops in the classroom. I'm like, I don't. My students are engaged. If they have the laptops open, it's because they're using the laptops for something great. Right? My students create my syllabi. My students lead the classes. They decide what they're going to do. I've had 2 classes say, we don't want to write term papers. We want to write a book about the importance of participatory learning. One with Duke students, one with students I taught throughout the CUNY system. Happy with their books. They've been read, and one of them has been read about 20,000 times. Believe me, most academic books don't get read 20,000 times. The point is, when you're engaged and something is meaningful, and when you talk about it with somebody, and when you listen to somebody else and have to come up with something that you actually are compromising, collaborating, and coming up with the best possible answer, that is the best way to learn. We've got lots of sociologists of education who go around with little clickers and measure these things and survey these things. A year from now, if people were to go survey all of you about what happened today, the thing you're most likely to remember is what you exchanged with somebody else. We also know you're most likely to remember that the idea you shared with the whole group was your idea, not the other guy. That's what learning is. Learning is social, and learning is also personal. We have studies that go back to the time period of Charles Eliot, beginning with Hermann Ebbinghaus and his forgetting curve, that tell us if there's a major event for knowledge, and you know you're working on knowledge for some major event, let's just say a final exam, within 1 week after that event, you forget 75% of the content of the exam. There's a major private prep school. I have a cease and desist order, so I'm not going to say the name. It's one of the 5 top prep schools, probably $60,000 or $70,000 a year. And they did an amazing thing with their students about 5 years ago. They had the same exact students in September. Remember, this is the top private prep school. In September, take the same exact exams that each student had taken in May. The average exam in May, average exam score in May was an 88. Which was an A- at this school. Can anyone imagine guess what 2.5 months later the most brilliant students, well-educated students in America did on the same exact exams they had taken in May, what they did in September? Ooh, you're mean! It was at 55. Needless to say, the parents paying $60,000, $70,000 a year were pretty freaked out. And the school use that as a great way of thinking about what learning. This method, it works, it calms down people in department meetings, it's a great way to make change, But now, Elizabeth and I are going to have a conversation. But before we do, is it okay if we pass around a mic and just hear 10 or so people shout? Or maybe I don't think we need a mic. How about if people, who feels brave and wants to shout out what they came up with? This is the one thing they came up with. Okay, go ahead, shout it.
An ongoing compensated think tank of faculty, and could be students and staff, who would always be considering how we can envision and shape our curriculum, responding to current events and cultural, social climate, constantly and actively considering our mission, addressing the intellectual and social challenges.
Wow, that's a whole mission.
Number 2 is a team that makes it happen.
That's great. Anyone else want to shout one out that you came up with? Yes.
A shifted curricular focus from content acquisition within majors, minors, and courses to skill acquisition so that those skills are transferable across fields.
And skills, essential skills, are not just STEM, but they're also communication, collaboration, project development, how you take an idea to an implementation and conclusion, creativity, critical thinking, all those. Great. Someone else want to shout out what they came up with? Yes.
Required courses on how to file taxes, how to get a job, and how to maybe turn your major into a job someday.
Fantastic. You know, we're very poor in education on that meta level. Very poor. And I agree with you completely. At the end of the book, I interview a number of my nieces and nephews and their girlfriends and boyfriends who were around for one Thanksgiving. And one of the students said, you know, I would like a class in how to be an adult 101. You know what? I want that. Anyone else want to shout one out, and then I think we'll have a conversation. One more. Yes, please.
Be intentional in the treatment of everyone by using universal teaching methods which will meet everyone where they are, from the inclusion of stop using words such as accommodation and preferred pronouns to meet people with what they need.
Wow, another mission statement. Thank you. Thank you all. The other reason I love to do an inventory method, I once did it with 6,000 IB teachers in the Philadelphia 76ers auditorium. That was pretty cool, like, except a little scary to see yourself on all those jumbotrons. What I love is that the person next to you sometimes has the most valuable thing you can learn in your life. And most of us go through life not knowing what the person next to us is saying. So it works as a method, it also works as an incredible metaphor for the fact that we can depend on each other, especially in turbulent times, in times of crisis, in times where we feel despair. There's always something the person next to you knows that might save your life. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Well, that was absolutely wonderful, Cathy. Thank you so much, and I loved the ideas that were thrown out, and I hope we'll collect these. Actually, are people willing for us to? You know, if you're willing, I'd love for us to collect this. This would be a really rich gold mine for us as we continue our visioning process. So I want to ask Cathy a few questions, and gosh, there's so much that I want to ask. But let me start with this. I love this book. I hope those of you who haven't had a chance to look at it, it really is a very powerful book. And one of my favorite quotes from your book is this: "The goal of higher education is greater than workforce readiness. It's world readiness." And you know, I actually have to say that I sometimes find myself sort of struggling against two extremes. There's a lot of people today who basically want to say college is about getting a job, and the value of every program is what's your sort of starting salary. And I think that's just really wrong-headed. But I also want to resist the college is just about like liberal arts for life, and you know, just the kind of doubling down on we don't have to worry about preparing our students for that first job. And so what I loved about your book is that, you know, you are committed to helping, and we heard it from here, you know, heard it here. You are committed to challenging colleges to do more to prepare students for life. But you also broaden that to world readiness. So what is that? What is world readiness?
So first of all, whenever a professor says to me, oh, college is not about job preparation, that degrades college, I say, well, did you go to graduate school? And graduate school is where professors get prepared to be professors, right? And we don't really hire professors unless they've been to graduate school. So it seems pretty hypocritical to me. But if you know the job you're going to have the rest of your life, you're a rare person. Right? The average 26-year-old, the average 30-year-old has already had 5 jobs. And contrary to public opinion, that hasn't changed in about 40 years. It's really about the same. The difference is many of those jobs don't, are contingent, or, there's all kinds of issues. But it's a pretty rare person that takes one path in life. So the trick is how you prepare students for the first job, but in a way that allows them to feel the freedom to say, am I happy in this job? Is this the job I want? Is the biggest possible salary and living in the biggest possible house that requires the biggest possible salary what I want? Or would I say, actually, because we know, for example, now a recent study from Pew showed that the job trajectory for humanities majors is exactly the same as STEM majors, and 20 years out, job satisfaction is the same. The difference is salary differential. But if you don't spend as much, you don't need as much. For some people, having a phenomenally large house and luxuries is a necessity. That's their goal in life. They need a job that pays for that much or they're going to have a problem. For other people, it isn't. Learning how you understand that about yourself is really huge, because everything in our society is telling you, and I think that is more your generation than ever before, that you have to be the top student at the top school with the top grades to get the top job or your life is over. I mean, the typical student now has been through 100, before they go to college, has taken 112 high-stakes summative tests of the kind where somebody's saying, this goes on your permanent record. I actually think that's a form of child abuse. For my last book, as I said, I was writing about K through 12, and one principal said to me, before our high-stakes North Carolina, this is when I was still at Duke and living in North Carolina, before our North Carolina end-of-year exams, I had students having mental breakdowns, their parents had mental breakdowns, the teachers had mental breakdowns. He said, heck, I had a mental breakdown last year. He wasn't talking metaphorically. We're really in a bad situation. So world readiness is also a meta knowledge of who you are and what you need to lead the life that you want to lead. Knowing what your values are and knowing what is a good match and what isn't a good match for those values. Right? That sounds like a cliche or superficial. It's actually, I think, the hardest thing for any of us to do. It takes courage to stray off one path you've been set on for your life. Although, in fact, most of us do it. I bet you I could turn the microphone over to many people in this room who are over, say, 40. And you'd find a lot of different stories about lives that had a crossroads where people went one direction, and it would have surprised their 20-year-old self that they took that direction. So that kind of self-knowledge, I think, both makes you world ready and makes you workforce ready. I also think we have to learn as a society, we have to take far, far greater control of our world. We're just on the verge of losing democracy. Just on the verge. If every American isn't saying, wait, we're a democracy and we think our voting machines were all hacked, and we're not saying that's the end of democracy, if that's not a national crisis, we're in a crisis. We're beyond a crisis. Whatever your politics are. Whatever your politics are. There are many other issues as well. And I hope world readiness is also saying, I believe in American values. I don't think it was a bill of goods. I think there are some really good things about freedom and democracy, and I want to know how to fight for those. I really want to know how to be prepared to fight for those. Whether it's getting out the vote, making sure I vote, not sleeping in and missing my chance to vote, taking personal responsibility, or organizing. I think that's crucially a world readiness skill.
It's great. As we think about making people world ready, one of the interviews that you did with your nieces and nephews toward the end of the book, I was very struck by that. One of the students you interviewed said, well, everybody says I need to collaborate, and we have collaborative projects, but nobody teaches me how to collaborate. So I'd love to hear, because this is actually something we've struggled with here and continue to struggle with, is how do we teach teamwork? How do we engage students? So share with us what you would advise.
So I do a lot of, not as much now that I'm at a public university, which I find fascinating, but when I was at Duke, I did a lot of corporate work where I would go in and talk to CEOs and CIOs about their own collaborative techniques. It always seemed really ironic because I was also working with the MacArthur Foundation on a project for K through 12. I'd go into 6th grade and the teacher would say, "You go collaborate." And I was like, wow, John Chambers brought me to Cisco to talk to his top CIOs and CEOs in the world to help them learn to collaborate, and the 6th grade teacher is telling a bunch of 6th graders, "You go collaborate," as if it were easy to do. I mean, those folks, those Cisco folks, are the world's geniuses at that, and they need help. So why are we just assuming 6th graders do? And I think that's what we usually do. Form in groups of 4 and do a project together. And we all know what that means, right? One dutiful person is gonna do the project. One lazy person is gonna just kind of be charming and hope they get the good grade. And the other 2 are somewhere in between. So I actually think the alternative to grading and the alternative to collaboration are the same things. And I've done many different versions, and I always have my students help me come up with versions. We work as a group to figure out how we're going to make collaborations work. And one of the most profound ways, and I'm going to tell a sad story, I think, as part of it. I might not, but I think I will. But one of the ways is I have, if I divide students into teams of 4, I have the team come up with the 10 or 12 things they think make up a good collaborator. We make a list. We usually do it online. Then we do a week's work on the project. We set the specs for the week, and they work on the project. They come back, and I have the team separate and never give an F. I don't believe in that failure. But to give a badge or a gold star or a point or something to the person on the team that they think deserves it. You don't have to give a badge. The person who deserves it in any one of those 12 things. Then everyone comes back together, and I usually do that where I always, because my methods are pretty unusual, so I always have a team of apprentice teachers who are working with me. I or somebody else is there as the 4 people come together and see for the first time if they've gotten any badges. Wow. Does that make people feel accountable? Right? If somebody's got 12 badges and no one else on the team has any, we got a problem. Right? But there's things like, this is from my coder world, being a fire starter. Fire starter can be the flakiest person in the world, but they're the person that always comes up with the genius idea that no one else would have thought of, and that solves the problem. Right? There's also a badge for implementer. The person who doesn't come up with that idea, but says, that sounds lame-brained, but I think I've got an idea about how it'll work. Somebody else who's the person who's the editor. That is so important. We have to present this to other people. How do we edit? So the group has already determined as a collective what counts to make their project work, and then they grade people. My sad story was that somebody at Duke who was the captain of one of the sports, I'll try to keep this vague, who was also a star in the theater, whose father was a very, very, very famous entertainment lawyer. He was planning on going on to Hollywood and have a Hollywood career. He looked like a young Adonis. He came back to his group and nobody had given him a badge in anything. I was teaching with Dan Ariely at the time, who was a social psychologist, and we had just done a lesson on how beautiful people often get a pass in this world. This young man turned his back on me and the apprentice teacher, said, I owe my group an apology. Let me have this time. He looked at them and said, I've totally let you down. I had no idea I was flaking out that badly. I'm not starting at 0, I'm starting at less than 0. You have to give me something that you don't want to do, that I can do, so I can be on the same ground, and I promise I will contribute from now on. He came up to us afterwards and said, I was that person you were talking about in that lecture. I had no idea. The world's been giving me a pass. I didn't even know. And that's the point. It's like white privilege, right? You don't know you're getting, no one says you get to go, what is it in Monopoly? You get to go whatever, that thing. Say it, someone else. You get to go past go, right. He didn't know. So that's one of many techniques where you actually are teaching students how to collaborate as they're collaborating. and also giving a system of accountability where students themselves feel accountable to the project, not just to themselves. For me, that's worked amazingly well, amazingly well. And I've done many, many, many variations of this over the years. And my students help me come up with variations over the years. But the key part is every member of the team feels they're responsible to a project, not to themselves. And everyone knows that every member of the team is responsible to that project and will give them fair feedback that will help them collaborate better and to grow as human beings. Because the biggest problem with that failing grade or any high-stakes summative test is you act as if that's the end point instead of the beginning. And we know from Ebbinghaus on, it is for most knowledge, right? It's like a cliff. Pass the final exam, shoop. When you're doing this kind of collaborative work, you're also learning how to get feedback from others in order that you can be a better participant in the world. That's also world readiness. You know, that's not only workforce readiness, that is world readiness. It's an amazing skill. We've got lots of workplace surveys and data surveys, especially from Google, recent one from Project Oxygen, another one, Project Aristotle by Google, of why that is such a crucially important skill. It's the single #1 way that people, turns out, rise through the ranks at Google to become managers, is knowing how to collaborate well and how not to bully people who are in their collaborative groups or take advantage of people in their collaborative groups.
That's great. I have a ton of other questions, but I'm just going to ask you one last question, and then I know we have a closing hymn to complete our convocation. Since it is Founders Day, you have given in your book, in your talk today, so many really, inspiring and challenging prompts for ways in which we need to change education. What do you see as continuities in education? Are there things about really good teaching and learning today that you think haven't changed since Socrates? Is it how much is revolutionarily changed? How much is...
So one of the things I fight is not only the workplace thing, but a movement called unbundling, which says, and this is happening at many state universities, we just want to focus on skills, and we're going to get rid of everything else. It just seems like a tragedy, because the positive part of universities is every university is this bundle of an incredible mix of knowledge that really doesn't occur many other places in society. So I would say the continuity from Socrates forward is a community of co-learners who don't all have the same interests, who don't all have the same aptitudes and skills, but who all have made a voluntary commitment to take time out from their lives to learn something. Unlike K through 12, nobody says you have to go to college. Nobody says you have to stay in college. Right? That you can drop out. That you're making a voluntary commitment to learn in a community with other learners. It's pretty amazing. So to me, that is a precious, priceless opportunity. We're on the verge of losing that in our country as well. It's under such attack, including the whole ideology. It's like fake news. All news is fake. All higher education is bad. This is a drumbeat we're hearing now, and it seems like if we don't fight for what is good in higher education and work to make higher education far better, we're going to lose something so precious for any society. Exactly at the time that other countries are reinvesting in higher education in a massive way. So I think that's what I would say is the biggest value. We're all learning together. That to me is what it's all about.
Thank you. Thank you so much.